you, and last, Mr. Yoder.
Thank you.
Mr. Yoder.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Secretary, thank you for joining us today. Congratulations on your appointment, and certainly we all join you in your efforts to create world stability and protect the national security of our great nation. I'd like to return to the North Korea conversation that's been brought up a couple times in today's hearing. Obviously, that's a situation that I know you're very concerned about. It's one that's created worldwide concern. There are threats being made against the United States, against our allies. And obviously, there are efforts being made to determine the credibility of those, but certainly I think your department and the country as a whole is taking this very seriously, and we appreciate that. I noted just your recent trip to Asia and the deployment of missile defense related to protecting, I think in your words, Guam, Hawaii, U.S. allies, and both ship and land-based. And then I also noticed recent comments you've made regarding removing missile defense. I think the Boston Globe's headline was, "Kerry offers missile defense concession." In light of our reneging on some previous administration promises regarding missile defense in Europe, I'd like to get your opinion on missile defense in general. Is missile defense an important strategic initiative, particularly in this region? And is it important for our national security, for the United States and our allies? And why do you believe that concessions to China regarding missile defense to be an effective foreign policy tool, and are these concessions in the best interest of the United States?
Well, let me dispel this interpretation before it gains any head of steam whatsoever, which I don't want it to do. I didn't offer any concession. I didn't offer any deal. I didn't offer any notional concept, except that publicly I did say, which is accurate, that if North Korea denuclearized, clearly your emergency deployment to Guam and your emergency deployment to Japan ceased to have a rationale. Now, I'm a supporter of missile defense. I supported missile defense when I was in the Congress. I supported rational missile defense. I didn't support the grand concept of the 1980s with this overall shield, but I've always supported development and deployment of an appropriate defensive capacity where there is a threat and where we have the ability to be able to properly address it. Now, we're seeing what we have committed through Phase 3 in Europe. And the only reason Phase 4 has been altered is because of the technology issues that existed. But we think, the military thinks, and the scientists believe they can do a better job of developing that than they were going to under Phase 4. So I think everybody sort of has looked at that and agreed. So I believe in a rational deployment. But, in this day and age, folks, when we're looking at the budget and thinking about all these things we want to do and have to do, if you don't have a threat, you don't have a need to deploy. And our first objective, obviously, of our policy is the denuclearization of the North. So I haven't, nothing is on the table. There is no offer. There is no concession. There is simply a statement of fact that if you were at X deployment the day before Kim Jong-un began all his stuff, and you thought that X deployment was sufficient to protect America, and then he starts to deploy a whole bunch of stuff, and you say, whoops, we got Guam, we got Hawaii, we're going to redeploy, and then that threat goes away, I assume rational people would say you could get back to X. There's no grand scheme here or anything. But the bottom line is, with respect to North Korea, our policy is denuclearization. So is the Russian policy, the Japanese policy, the Republic of Korea's policy, and China's policy. There's one player in there who has the most ability to make something happen with respect to something we've been working on for 20 years that hasn't happened, and that's China. And I think it is pretty certain that Kim Jong-un is sitting there calculating up until now that unless China cracks down on him, he's free to play the game. And that's the way it's worked up until now. I think China is changing its calculation, and that's yet to be proven in the days ahead. But if China will join us as a partner here, I think we can address everybody's interests of stability in the region and the long-term health and welfare of the Korean Peninsula, as well as the other interests we have in the region. That's all I'm saying.
And do you think that China will be enticed to assist us if the offer of removing missile defense is part of a conversation?
I don't think China, frankly, with all due respect, I don't think China reacts to, quote, enticements. I think China acts in its interest, as most nations do. And I think that China will determine what is in its interest. I do think it's in China's interest to have stability on the peninsula. And, you know, we'll have to see whether or not, I think it's also in their interest not to see the United States go to war with North Korea and have a war on their doorstep. So I think there are rational reasons why the Chinese might choose here to help us conceivably bring North Korea into a very different posture.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Secretary